and, this concerns the resident survey.
That will come up during the agenda this evening.
Okay, all right.
So we'll see you shortly,
All right.
like literally in a couple minutes.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else on non-agenda items? Welcome.
I want to mention a law that was just passed by the state, I don't know if this is gonna be brought up.
It will be. Well, go ahead, you can talk about it.
The S50 affordable housing, it was just passed by the state, it has to be signed by the governor, I believe.
It was signed.
And, I
Excuse
just
me,
want,
is that microphone on? So people can hear
Yeah.
you?
it is hot.
Say a little closer. Can you hear him in the back? Okay.
The law S50, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And, I just wanted to, this is supposed to push, for more affordable housing.
Yes.
Supposed to force the cities and towns to
Right.
provide more housing.
Right.
I'm a little concerned about this town, there's not much available land left, so, we might have to come with alternatives to meet the number we're gonna put up.
We're gonna have a lively discussion about that shortly, and, so I appreciate you bringing that to the board's attention.
Okay, thanks for your time, that's what I want.
Thank you. Anyone else on non-agenda items? Seeing none, close this portion of the meeting. No resolutions to approve.
Except for maybe we do the extension, but.
Yes, we can do the extension now.
Yeah, before.
Okay, John, would you explain the extension? Matthew? Welcome. Okay, you made it. Appropriately, the not yet at the roll call, that was good.
19 Valley View, 68 Mountain Avenue, little bit of 68 Mountain Avenue going to 19 Valley View.
Right.
The little stem.
This was really a re-subdivision, none of the zoning has changed, and they need to, get some additional time out of the file plan.
Okay, as I understand it, we typically grant an extension for governmental delays and approvals, which I understand that this was caused by.
Yes.
Is there any other further comments or questions from the board at this point?
The resolution I prepared for this extends them to May 1st
Okay.
to record the subdivision.
Which is really not that long. Typically, they get 6 months, but we'll give them 90 days, I guess.
They expired, they already expired.
Oh, okay.
So it was, what we've typically done is between 4 and 6 months, depending on the need from the expiration date. So that
Yeah.
gives us to May 1.
And they feel comfortable they can get the,
That's what we ran by their attorney. So.
okay. So just to give the public an update on what we're talking about is, when we grant a resolution for approval for any type of action from the board, amongst the list of things that an applicant needs to comply with is a bunch of government regulations. It's well established in law that the delay in a external third-party government approval cannot stop an applicant from getting an approval or extending an approval that they've been granted within a reasonable time frame. 6 months is well within the reasonable time frame, and some governmental approvals like DEP wetlands delineation can take up to 5 to 7 years. So that's what this is being asked for, and it's a very rote type of action by the board. That being said, because this is a resolution, I'll open up this portion of the meeting to the public. Anyone wishing to have any comment? All right, seeing none, we'll close this. Does any of the board members have any questions on this? No? Okay, entertain a motion, I guess, to approve if somebody wants to make that approval.
I'll make the motion.
Can I hear a second?
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Committee woman Camp,
Yes.
Mr. Argiro, no, Mr. Puglisi,
Yes.
okay. Mr. DiBianca,
Yes.
Mr. Esposito.
Yes.
Chairman Gallup,
Yes.
Mr. Lippett,
Yes.
Mr. Giano.
Yes.
Okay, on to the fun stuff. Last meeting, we talked about the master plan. This is the master plan workshop. In terms of what our goals are this evening, there's no specific goals that we're trying to reach per se on this particular evening, other than to go over the resident survey and questions towards that, and any other business associated with the master plan that can be discussed at this time. There was some correspondence from the public, but before we get into those, I would like any of the board members, if you have any comments about the residents survey, just to let us know now, or any discussion. Okay, so if we got two specific ones, resident surveys drafts from by the public, which I thank them for. One of the things I would like to have the board comment on, and I'm gonna just leave out the details on the, where it was suggested, but there were some suggestions that went into how many children you have, how old you were, how many cars are parked in your driveway, where you shopped. Personally, and I'm one of the 9 or 10 or 11 who are voting here, I don't find that type of information from a local board would be appropriate. Most of that information can be gleaned from the census. So just I didn't want to leave that as an aspect of resident input that was not addressed. So I think, is there any agreement or disagreement with that statement?
I agree.
Yeah, too much?
I agree.
I don't know, I don't fill out the census, but I would fill this out,
Okay,
right?
So-
Because I feel like this is more personalized, it's coming from the town, it's affecting the town directly. I have to be honest, when the
Yeah.
census comes out, I'm just like, no, I don't fill it out, I don't take the time to do it. I don't know how many people,
Well, this
Kyle,
works the same way.
do you do it?
It's personal business.
okay, you fill it out?
well, if you don't fill it out, it's actually against the law.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna publicize this particular portion of the meeting, but you know.
I don't even do it.
I'm only kidding,
I'm like, I'm in
yeah.
business in New York City, I don't.
didn't fill it out.
Well, I didn't know, I thought it was like a demographic thing, I don't know.
So,
I'm shocked.
the question of the board is, how intrusive are we gonna use these, questions? I mean, I made my particular feelings, known on this particular thing. Committeewoman Keon, said it was okay. But, I mean, this is why we're doing this, is to have this discussion on where we stop and where we get information.
Would you repeat some of the
If I could just.
items that you wish to include or not include?
Well, if I could go to some of the suggestions,
Dan, if we could follow that with, I was gonna ask John, are the data points you're looking for?
I think you need to focus on what the purpose of the survey is, and the design of it. It's kinda like, if it ain't broke, I didn't fix it. The last survey we used is exactly the format you see in red. The changes that were made kept it the same length. Couple questions got deleted, couple questions got answered, but we got a huge response. And questionnaires, long questionnaires, generally don't get the response, get round filed, and that's not what we want.
That's not true.
It's kinda, gets that, I mean, I don't have any problems adding questions to it, but with one of them is 16 pages long and the other's 13 or something. And I think there's things in there that you could add. Maybe there's some questions that I kept from the old one that you wanna get rid of. I spent some time looking at them, and I think that's one of the things you gotta keep in mind.
How many pages?
I mean, it'll be absolutely worthless If we send this thing out, we don't get a response.
Yeah, I kinda agree, you don't want it to be hunting, because people are not gonna fill it out.
I'm not gonna fill out 13, 16
But there were
pages.
some good questions, I thought,
Why don't we go through the two new ones quickly and see what we can glean from them? Because I think the goal would be to not go from 2 to 13 or 16, but to pick up relevant questions that we missed.
Exactly.
So, just do this real quick, and I'm just gonna suggest that some of these data points are already included in the census, or may be included, you know.
A great deal of the data type questions that were in both of the questionnaire, surveys are all gonna be part of the background study. They're almost complete. Mr. Gallagher.
And we shouldn't duplicate.
No, I
Well, we
mean,
tried not to.
Right.
Yeah, so, the first one, where do you work? So, the vast majority of the census data would apply to where do you work. They're asked where the commutes are, you know, how far you travel for work without getting specific on where do you work. Which, again, we can disagree on the details, but like, I don't wanna tell the government where I work, thank you. Just my 2 cents. I'll tell everyone else where I work, but not the government. And then, how many people in your household over 18?
census numbers.
How many cars in your household? Again, the last thing we need to do is have data on how many cars are in a household, and with all the, break-ins. Is parking ever an issue for you at home? That's just not an important question to me, at least.
It just doesn't apply to Warren.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Is that agreement? Okay,
I mean, if you're in Danella or Middlesex, that's a different story, it might be an issue.
the use of public transportation, I don't even think we have public transportation, except for the bus, and we know those figures.
Yep.
If yes, where do you take the train from? Again, census data. What do you like most about living in Warren? I actually like that one, that's a good question. I wanna hear about positive things and how we can amplify those. What do you find the most challenging thing about living in Warren? Another, I think, good question. Yeah, good. And then there's option, okay, that's option 1, open-ended. I'm a big fan of open-ended questions because it kind of gets us the best data. It's not the easiest data to cull through. It's what would be called as unordered data. But that being said, I always found it to be the most insightful. Option 2 of that would be specific answers to those. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I would like the open-ended question more than anything.
John, how many people responded last time?
About 3,000.
That's a lot of people to read.
That's a lot. Well,
Will it be digital?
it'll be digital, so you can do unordered data.
We've been using
AI.
AI at work.
Yeah.
Is it?
Consolidate the themes.
Yeah.
You can feed the questions right into an AI platform.
Yeah,
It's
and it
all
spits it
themes,
out.
Like, wow, 5 seconds.
Now, you do have to check it because it's not
Yes.
always,
But you will get
It has
major themes
programmer's
of
bias.
pushing it through one of the
And
platforms.
the
Yes.
township has that equipment?
no, that's easy enough to put together.
Yes. There's no cost to it.
No.
We can access.
Well, you can use my $20 per month on ChatGPT.
I use it too.
That works. Okay, the specific, okay, and, if you moved to Warren in the past 15 years, what are the main reasons you moved here? I would actually just open that up, why did you move to Warren if you moved to Warren? Or did you grow up here?
Isn't that the question before?
No, I don't think so. I think it's what you like about Warren,
It was what you like and what you found most challenging.
which actually could be combined into one question, but, you know, talking about making it, you know, shorter rather than longer. Although I do like the idea of having a positive only question. That's gonna be my theme, positive. For the following list, what are the, okay, so then we get into what a resident feels about the master plan. Now, I can tell you as a fact that residents don't feel anything about the master plan because the vast majority don't know what a master plan is. They will never know what a master plan is. They don't have time for it, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the questions that pertain to asking about how they, you know, what a master plan must address is probably not, we could probably word them differently that appeals to more residents. Does that make sense? Unless somebody thinks that the master plan is gonna be the new, hop diva. No? Okay.
Excuse me, along with the master plan, is there a question along here that is asking what they think about the future of Warren?
Yeah, I think it gets to there.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I mean, as
these
long
are.
as we got that covered.
Yeah, these are issues and trends.
Right.
Now, I will tell you this, these types of questions are, somewhat in some of the other older questions, but there's a lot of new good suggestions here also. So, well, we gotta take a look at and bring them all together. That being said, I would like to get to a final resident survey by the next meeting. So we do need to have as much input as possible, getting to the end here. They talk about new construction and development in Warren. Boy, you could just write these. I'm not even sure you need to ask. You know, it's in everyone's face all the time. The one question I did like in the old survey, because I remember actually filling it out, was the question of what, when you think of Warren, what would you like to make it think of? And one of the answers was like fields and hedgerows. Now, I happen to be haying about 15,000 acres of farmland at that point, so I particularly like that question. But that being said, I think that it's probably, while we could throw a question in there like that, in terms of landscapes, vistas, and venues, we could take a look at what, you know, today's Warren looks like, which is, you know, obviously markedly different than the Warren that some of us grew up in, you know, 20, 30 years ago. So I think it's probably worth doing a deeper dive into some sort of question as to where we're going and what we need to protect, or what we would like to try to protect. The next part of the suggestion is the approve or strongly approve or no opinion, disapprove and strongly disapprove on different types of housing units. I'm not sure that this is specifically helpful in so much as planning. I don't think we're gonna get a whole lot of positive response to an apartment building. This board has never approved a non-court demanded apartment building. It's not something like we would plan for. That being said, we may be forced to, but in a survey, I'm not sure where this would be going, because everyone pretty much knows what the results are.
But you have to remember the 3 stages of affordable housing. The first stage, we were in court, wound up with a settlement, wound up with the first regional contribution agreement. And all of that was court settlement. Across the street, down the road, Greenwood Meadows, all of that was court cases, lengthy court cases. I spent 22 days on the stand in Tom River as a witness. Crazy. Second one was, we just left out. We got regional contributions, no litigation, no anything, no rezoning. Third one, we just got through. You know how long that took? 4 years of litigation.
Tons of lawsuits.
And
So the question is, okay, we're gonna save that question, because the question that begs to be answered is, how do we do this with the least amount of demand on resources and et cetera, but still staying out of court and covering it without market.
At this you've got the schedule there, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a train coming down the tracks.
Yeah, I'd like to meet it head on. Just to bring the analogy full front, right? Continuing with the questions, where should affordable housing be located is probably not a question. Okay, so this is where we get into some details on how the board position is. If we put out a survey saying where should affordable housing be done? If I was a builder in town, or if I owned a piece of property, I may start lobbying for a particular answer on these. Not to mention, if we know what the answer is and you know what the board's gonna do, you'd also start buying up that property. I think that's probably, how do we say this? I think the answers and the questions need to be non-specific to locations, and more general in nature. As soon as we get into locations where we want a particular building to go, we are now in trouble. So we need to stay this in a broad sense. The master plan is a broad document, it's not a specific document. So that's my input for that, so I'm not sure that I don't think I would be supportive of that particular thing. Mixed use downtown, diverse, we can ask those questions. How often do you shop in Warren? What to do with Chubb? So here's an I don't really know the legality of this question, so let's ask the attorney. Can we ask in a survey what to do with Chubb?
I wouldn't, to piggyback off of your prior comment,
Yeah.
I wouldn't mention specific sites for precisely the reason that you brought up.
Okay.
Well, the short version, which we call the original
Yes.
survey, what did I have that?
It's in his.
Yeah, I did. There's a question on warehousing. But the issue on, affordable housing units and the downtown is question 6, revised.
Okay.
On-
That being said, I mean, council has just advised us not to ask for the
Try
Chubb.
to have a name.
Okay. I think we need to give it a little bit more thought in how we
Yeah.
word this. Because if we look at the map, I think we could describe a corridor. There's 2 corridors that parallel 78. One is a wetlands portion to the north of 78.
Right.
And then there's a corridor on the south side of 78 that is somewhat conducive to business and office buildings.
Because you do economics with
The economic centers on exit 33 and exit 36, I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Right.
So, I don't know, I think we can look at it in terms of planning on what we would like to see in those particular areas, although there really isn't much undeveloped. Well, I say that, but gosh, when we talk about undeveloped property,
This is probably
yeah, there's quite a few acres up there.
right now, based on the tax assessment records as of the first of the year, you're about 1.8 miles of agricultural / vacant land. Of
Square
that-
miles.
Yeah, which is
A lot of
over
property.
1,100 acres.
It's a lot of property.
But probably half of it is undeveloped.
Now, you say undevelopable, I say,
It's
to what
well, it's
extent?
regulated undeveloped.
Okay, oh, you mean as wetlands?
Wetland, riparian,
Okay.
that type of stuff.
Alright.
So, I mean, that's off my head, we haven't finished, we have all the vacant land mapped, we have it identified, we've got the overlays, we don't have, the final numbers.
To continue down with this particular survey input, is stormwater runoff an issue? It is. I don't care where you live, it's always an issue. I think, just FYI, I think we were using stormwater as a major portion of this master plan, and we're looking for a full engineering analysis of where stormwater is going right now, in order to take a look at
Is
it.
it a survey question, Bill?
No, it's not, because I think we have to deal with,
It's a question that's involved in planning, period.
it's a little bit like traffic,
Yeah.
you know, yes, of course it is, it's part of it, and by the way, we can't do anything about it because they're all county roads. I'd like to change that, but can't. Okay, moving on. We did ask the, park recreation question, to some extent, but this is actually, I think, a pretty valuable one. I'd like to know what the residents consider recreation. I think last time we asked this question, it was asked more of, should the open space be left undeveloped?
Your questions 8 and 9 in the short version.
Yeah.
That one I submitted go to that issue, I think.
Yeah, and it was overwhelmingly, most of Warren thought they should be left undisturbed, which is contrary to every parent with small children.
I think it's a good theme to incorporate in the next survey.
Yeah.
We need more recreational space.
What type?
Would you be okay with undeveloped space becoming additional recreational
Yeah.
space for children or families? Let's see a rec center.
Yeah, I like the way you say
20
that, 'cause people
20
want a rec center, but they don't realize that
You're gonna give something up.
you gotta do something up, yeah.
Right.
We're not repurposing something.
20 years ago, everybody wanted to leave it alone.
Yeah.
No, sorry, 20 years ago, they said, no, do something.
What was the percentage?
Roughly 65%, 2/3 said, I think we should have more than just, left wild and serve as
Okay.
sanctuaries.
Great.
And
That's
then,
different than I remembered it, so it's good you're reminded.
There was a follow-up question, what would you like to see open space used for other than left wild? I somehow or other deleted my numbers.
Okay. All right, so I like, these particular questions are interesting in terms of left wild, and if not left wild, what do we like to see and what do we participate in? Which is the next question. And, okay, so there's a suggestion on hiking trails.
That was overwhelmingly supported.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go out there and say, the idea of hiking trails on a publicly owned piece of property, I'm all in favor of. But we started having hiking trails in people's backyards.
Yeah.
And I just think that, in today's day, I just don't think it works, and I don't think it should be a main emphasis of this particular planning board at this time for this master plan. Would you guys agree? And it very much came up a couple times in the last couple decades where people just didn't want people hiking behind their houses over long, miles of stretches, so, and it was part of the master plan as a goal, and I just think we should just probably, I don't know that we need to get away from it. I think you just, the township committee just repurposed one of those hiking trails, to limit the development. But even that change was just, it was through someone's backyard,
There's another question related to that, is currently you have a 2-penny tax.
Yes.
for open space, and you're allowed to go to 5. And whether or not you would be in favor of increasing the, tax.
Right.
Believe it or not, that question was answered in going from 1 to 2, almost 80% in favor of.
Yeah, I don't know that we're gonna get a whole lot of pushback for, getting some more funds
I
to
work in a bunch
protect.
of different towns, one of them is Franklin Township.
Yeah,
They have 5 cents and have had 5 cents for about, probably going on 40 years now. They take in several $1 billion every year. And if you've been down to the Franklin Municipal Complex, they've got a soccer field, baseball field.
so they use open space money just not for open space.
Well, they bought 6,000 acres of land, plus now they start to improve it.
Well, that's a good distinction, though. Open space isn't necessarily all for the protection of open spaces. It's also sometimes for the development
Yep.
of open spaces. I think we just need to be careful about how we word things. Because the way I understood answering those questions 20 years ago, I would have said they would have been protecting open space, not putting up soccer fields, which would be, I'm not necessarily against that, but
Right.
I don't necessarily see that as open space. So,
I mean, East Mountain Park was always an open space area on our plan,
right,
and now it's got some substantial recreation facilities.
okay, any other comments on that? Okay, so there's a question on long-term policy on preserving rural roads. This comes into the RSIS standard on roads, which I think is, it's tough to put this necessarily in a master plan because it's dictated by governmental authorities that are outside our purview. So it wouldn't really matter whether we thought something should stay one way or the other. It really meant how the owner of the property or the developer. That being said, I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see there's a lot of room for new roads at this point. There might be a couple, but.
I mean, your biggest issue is that years ago, the county wanted to make Mount Bethel Road 4 lanes from the 78 straight down to the center of town. And the committee fought that. Over time, the intersections have been widened, which is always your choke points anyway. And if the policy has always been the rural part of the road is its tree line. If all of a sudden we start widening them out to 30-foot wider pavement and sidewalks, we've changed the look of the town overnight.
So then there's some, well, again.
I would leave it to an element of master plan. I don't think the question here is,
Yeah.
you know, it's.
I'm not sure we could get into the required conversation about RSIS standards on roadways and how many trips can go over so many widths, and yeah, again, it's outside of our purview in a lot of ways. And then circulation and traffic. Okay, so circulation and traffic patterns in town are gonna be part of the master plan, they always are. That being said, we really don't have a whole lot of say in the matter because the large arterial roads in this town are all county owned. There is some, and we will have, I think we should have some suggestions or plans on overall circulation where we see issues.
That's an element, plan element.
Right.
All
That's
those
all right.
sites.
Okay, so thank you for that set of questions. And then there's a much more significant set of questions that go to, I think.
Could I, sort of
Address those?
walk you through you? Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you come up
Okay.
and give us a what for on these? I have a copy here, I think, Mary Ellen, do you have a couple more copies for the board?
I have, oh, you have, do you have?
I don't, thank you.
No, I'll make sure I have the right one. Thank you.
I just don't have that. Wasn't this a thing?
That's about it.
That would be great.
12
Back
pages.
because of the potential.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Okay, I have more than one. You got this one? You guys have it?
So, I know you're gonna walk up through this, and I just wanna give our feedback, or I should say my feedback, and the board obviously can, but thank you, number one. And number two, it's very lengthy, so, yeah, so it would be a good, as you go through there, to kind of pick out the priorities, where you see the priorities. And it,
give you what the overall.
okay, all right,
All right.
you have the floor.
So, thank you. What I did was I took, Mr. Chadwick, I took your short, we were calling it
The short questionnaire, yeah.
and I made sure that I incorporated everything that was in yours into this one. And the other overview of this questionnaire is that it follows the master plan in terms of sections, topics.
Sure.
And, And then I guess I'll say that the last thing that I had in mind as I was developing it was that we wanna be very forward-looking. You only do this survey once every 10 years. And the other thing was that I wanted to give the residents, the reason it's so long is it gives the residents context of, you know, what are we talking about? And so it starts with, you know, this is what the master plan, what your planning board, what your town, governing board is going to, provide in the master plan that's developed, and we're looking for your input. And I also indicate that there's a lot of statistics that are going to be developed, you know, outside of this questionnaire. So you're gonna get your data of population trends and
Right.
whatever else.
Exactly.
So, looking forward, I summarized the goals and objectives that were in the existing master plan, but I gave the residents the opportunity to say, okay, is this goal and objective something that we still want for Warren? And if yes, keep it, if not, change, how would you change it? Alright, so that takes up, or do you have some additional vision for Warren in the next 10 years? And so they can add their own goals and objectives. Going to page 4, I don't think most people know what the different zones are that we have
Right.
in Warren. And so, you know, rather than, so I think, Mr. Chadwick, one of your, questions was talking about, you know, different zones, but I gave it the contact, I gave, you know, an entire list, these are all the zones, and then is there any way that you wanna change them? And again, left them some opportunity for open-ended questions. Now, whether or not you leave the question that Mr. Chadwick put in there for Chubb, I think that you'd be really remiss in not asking the residents what they think, not in a specific context, but in a more general context. Should it be zoned for something else? Should we allow for, residential? Should we allow for business? And then, you know, see what you get back. That's why I felt that it's very important for, that, and because you got such flack on the zoning that was done prior, you know? The big, the warehouse I'm talking about, you know, when we were thinking about, not we, but when it was being thought, whether or not to put a warehouse there.
Wrong board. That wasn't this board.
Right.
That's why I was a little confused there for a second.
Okay, so, you know, that's why I think, you know, you probably would like to get some input from the residents on, what they want to do. That's, what is it, 13 acres or something?
Yeah, let me just reiterate, under advice of counsel and from what I know, is we wouldn't necessarily ask what to do with a particular property. Nor would we make a veiled question that was easily understood to be talking about a particular property. That specifically is illegal.
Right, okay, but the zoning options, that's not, it's much
So,
broader.
Right, no property is zoned by itself. Right, so if we gave the impression that we were zoning a particular property a certain way, now, okay, I'm gonna get really legal for a second and pull me in if I'm not correct, but there are mechanisms that are legal that you can rezone a particular property. But it has to go through lots of steps in order to get there. Lots of public hearings and lots of arguing, whatever, okay? So, but that is 100% outside of the master plan discussion. So a master plan is always in a general sense and never in a specific sense, if that makes sense, on a particular piece of property.
I hear what you're
Okay.
saying. I think it's a shame that you wouldn't get resident input, but I hear what
I
you're
gotta talk to the
saying.
legislature, and no one wants to go to jail, you know, I'm fine, whatever.
All right. And then I included Mr. Chadwick's question about the vacant office space. And then a little bit on affordable housing. I think in the February,
You jumped there, what page are you on?
I'm on 5.
Okay.
Yep. I got you, I'm following.
Section 3.
We're good.
So, you know, in the February meeting, I think we were talking about, should it be concentrated in one area, spread throughout the township? Should we consider some sort of, transportation? These were like issues that came up, I think, at the February meeting that I tried to integrate into this survey so that you could get, resident feedback on
Right.
that.
Just as feedback, I do like the 5B. Local transportation is definitely an issue. I'm not sure it's a master plan issue in terms of private opportunities for like Uber and Lyft, as opposed to more public, like county paid senior busing for particular
Right,
ages or
right.
so, which can be incorporated into a master plan.
Yeah.
So that, the one thing I would, and again, you know, I don't wanna make this a soliloquy here, but, so board members pop in, you know, the concentrated in one area and the spread throughout the township. Now, my concern with just that particular wording is assuming that we have control over whether it's concentrated in one part. We don't.
Yeah.
I mean, we do, I shouldn't say that. We do to some extent, but to a large extent, we don't. In other words, if we go to court and the court forces us to put up housing in a non-concentrated area, it makes us look like we did it because we asked it on the master plan when it wasn't us who did it, it was the court who did it. So, I don't know what the right answer is. All I'm doing is giving feedback as to the concentrated in one area versus not. That being said, it's a really good question in terms of discussion about how to phrase it properly in the master plan as we go forward. So,
Dan, I would just add, I think that's a slippery question.
Yeah.
Because, you know, even within the context of affordable housing, there's fair market,
yes,
right?
Right.
And lower income, which we have to push back on developers who have tried to distinguish.
Right.
And I don't think anybody wants to live in the, you know, the lower income housing. They will, oh, that's that neighborhood over there. And I think we have to be careful not to, you know, call that out.
Yeah, I think it'd be wise to spread it throughout.
Agreed, but we've seen developers with projects try and position this corner is for that, and we push
I mean,
back.
unfortunately, we've been pushed into corners in several instances, but the, impacts from that have, I mean, there was 60 units of affordable housing across the street from us. It's been integrated in the downtown area for now almost 40 years.
Yeah.
Is it a big issue? Probably have.
I think it's a big issue. I
It's
mean,
not a big issue,
Yeah.
it never has been.
right.
It was, you know, part of the framework when that whole, Rolling Hills was built.
Right.
And, we have another one in town, it's new, it's, you know, it's going through its growing pains. But it'll, what you were saying,
So moving forward,
Right,
the
okay.
discussion in that section is just, I'm just gonna punt a little bit on the specific nature of defining that at this point, but I understand what you're saying, and I think we understand that this is important, and Matt, thank you very much for bringing that to our attention.
Okay, age-restricted housing, I included Mr. Chadwick's,
Right.
question there. Then it goes into traffic and circulation, there wasn't a whole lot I could put in
No.
there, because as you say, everything is sort of county,
But
designated.
I do like your bike route, and that would be interesting.
Yeah,
to see if we can do some bike lanes.
And again, I'm thinking 10 years from now. I
Right.
think if you think 10 years from now, you know, we got climate change, we got population increase, we've got, you know, all kinds of explosion of development. And that's why when you develop your questions, I hope you will be thinking in the future. And then community facilities, again, I included some open space
Right.
questions, educational.
This is very similar to the last one that we
Yes,
just
yeah,
went over, so
right.
this is
A lot of the stuff I
Yeah.
copied from the master plan or from Mr. Chadwick.
And the other submission too.
Ye-
Yeah, earlier we spoke about, so that's great,
Right,
thank you.
and so there's nothing more on 7, 8, conservation was,
If I could, would you mind if I just backed up for a second?
Sure, go
I don't wanna build, you have number 511, I don't know if that makes sense, section 5, community facilities. So I think one of the aspects that we haven't touched on a whole lot, and I think the board really needs to, I'm not sure it's in the resident survey or our plan discussion itself, but we need to have a frank discussion about emergency services and where they are and response times and what our expectations and what the public's expectations on response times are. So I think thank you for bringing that up.
yeah, that's a good point.
Well, along with that, as far as emergency and rescue squads, have to look towards the future as this town grows. It's gonna be a crisis for our volunteers.
Yes.
And, there should be some questions in there, so people can anticipate what they anticipate would look like in the future.
Right. Yeah,
You talk about manpower.
manpower, either paid
I'm
or
talking about manpower.
paid, unpaid, if there's gonna be a
volunteers,
place,
Combination.
Yeah.
how they work. In fact, we probably should get some input from our firehouses.
We discussed capital parts of it, there really aren't any long-term plans, other than the one on Elm Street.
Okay, so that's probably worth a discussion item in terms of asking for feedback.
Yeah,
From-
the rescue squad is part paid, part volunteer.
Right.
You have one.
And it begs the question, is that adequate? And I'm gonna suggest it's not.
All I can remember is Rick talking about you were able to maintain your fire rating for the township because of response times, and it had something else to do with the equipment,
Okay,
which was, you know, everybody has to pay fire insurance, and it helps.
right. It'll lower the insurance bill. Okay,
8,
yeah,
page 8, just talks about, all right, so this is really, looking ahead, in terms of, climate change. That was kind of what was in my mind as I was, developing these questions. Taking the existing master plan, conservation plan goal, should it be changed? If so, how would you change it? Should we encourage habitat conservation? Flooding concerns, I gave some references in terms of, you know, part of this was to educate the residents also as they're going through the, questions.
they're just as far as background, there's a big requirement in all new master plans that addresses climate change. I wanna say it's like 20, 30, 40 pages.
Yeah.
It's big, so a lot of these questions will be answered, and, okay, that's good, yeah, and I appreciate that. It's a good
And
question.
9 of 10, it talks about, you have a lot of, on the, planning map of Warren, the zoning map, sorry. A lot of the zoned area, EP 250, is there anything that can be done, should be considered in terms of changing? I don't even know if you
There's,
can.
so, Just FYI background again, the vast majority of the EP 250 is now purchased open space by either the township, county, or state. There was also some discussion to the uplands within the EP 250, which isn't great, it's pretty far and few in between. They tend to be used by blue collar landscape services, and there was some discussion about having those as a recycling facilities, or at least encouraging recycling facilities. In other words, everyone loves to get, you know, their lawn cared for and their trees trimmed and everything, but they need a place to do that. And it's getting harder and harder for these guys. So there's some opportunities in the EP 250 that may lend itself to that type of. Right.
Yes, okay.
And it's kind of happening now. There's a way to licensing now that would lend itself to those areas, but if we said and kind of encouraged it, it would relieve a little pressure and would reduce our costs
Yeah.
of doing business.
Okay. And then the same open space, again, the open-ended question, what kind of things would you suggest? That's on page 9, the 2 penny tax on the bottom of page 9. Okay, page 10, noise and air pollution. So again, looking ahead 10 years, we're not gonna be a fossil fuel driven, state.
Possibly not.
Yeah, depends. How cheap oil is it?
So that's still up to
So-
the air.
You know, does this township want to take a proactive step towards moving us forward, you know, with regard to getting rid of the fossil fuel, the noise pollution, the air pollution, the, whatever else fossil fuel does to us. So that is, what those questions.
So just to give a little bit more feedback also, we gotta be careful in our master plan that we're broad-based, and some of these suggestions would be more regulation or law-based or ordinance-based. So we would stay away from saying we're gonna outlaw like gas-powered trimmers. Let's just say I'm making up something,
Right,
and
right.
I'm not suggesting that we're gonna outlaw anything or allow anything. I'm just saying that's probably more of a township committee regulation as opposed to a master plan. Like
And-
that specific.
And we do have like noise regulation.
We do have noise
And they're all
regulations
there
and light
already.
regulation, light pollution already on the
So the
books.
question is, should they be changed, or?
Right, but just not inside the master plan.
Yeah.
That typically would be a more broad-based. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I just wanna make sure we stay broad-based. As soon as the master plan starts to get like super detailed,
Right.
it goes awry.
Okay, it could be addressed in a general objective,
Yes, as a goal,
yes.
a general goal.
Yeah, okay. And, okay, so we did that. Last thing on page 10 is the utilities. I don't know if you require that already. Do you require new development for the electric and the stuff to go underground?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes, do a long time.
yeah, probably the last 20 years or so.
If we could just get rid of the telephone poles.
Oh, you and me both. I'm telling you, right? We really need, I don't like the telephone poles either. I'm with you.
All right, now, the last page, you probably don't like. Wait, no, okay.
Wow,
Wait.
to set it up, wait, let's set it, the first is the most challenging.
Page 11.
We're doing so good.
Page 11, is just, I didn't really, you have to do this with this cross-acceptance process. You have to, you know, with the contiguous,
Townships?
Yeah. All right, but now let's go to section, well, and section A
You
is
have to
just.
recognize the land use policies, you would not have to match them.
Right, it's,
I mean, there may be inconsistencies, in the case of Warren, there aren't. because Greenbrook's got a 60,000 square foot lot size, and we have a 65, 340.
Okay,
And
yeah.
and we got Rivers on one side, and we match up with Burns pretty good, and we match up with Watchung.
So you're.
I mean, Berkeley Heights could say that we didn't, take into consideration their zoning, because we have the K-Hop development right next to Berkeley Heights, but what we did is a big buffer between them.
Yeah.
So, because they're zoned all acre over that side of town.
Okay, all right, bottom of 11 is just if they wanna provide any other input, and give their contact. All right, so page 12 is what you really are not gonna like. And, that is, to solicit help from the residents.
Now, I just want to make the very clear and obvious observation that we are accepting all sorts of input this evening.
Yes.
So maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah. But, you know, I think there's a ton of work to be done, and I'm not sure that it can all be done in working sessions with one meeting per month.
So, we have 2 meetings per month, but that notwithstanding, one thing I'm very sensitive to is making sure that everything is done in the public, that every utterance that's put onto the master plan is understood to be a public document and a public hearing, and something that everyone can participate in the right order, in an orderly fashion. So, we do have, you know, a health board, ad hoc sewage authority, we have the utility authorities, all public hearings, and I would, you know, as right now as chairman of the board, I have the purview of creating agendas and creating the ad hoc committees, and I'm really not in favor of anything that's not in the public eye all of the time, every word. And I think those of anyone who's participated on any of my boards, I'm a stickler for that.
Yeah.
So,
I understand where you're coming from, and I respectfully disagree.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's a lot of expertise out there in this community that would be helpful to you.
and I encourage that expertise to make themselves known so that we can discuss that in public during a public meeting. Yeah, just like you're doing, by the way, this is fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all I had.
No,
No, thank you.
that's fantastic. No, that's really good. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so, having that input, does any of the board members have any further input or any questions that you would like to add in addition to those fairly thorough documents? No?
No, I thank you for doing that.
No, you're welcome, you're welcome.
Very comprehensive. My thought on this is, it is very complex, very lengthy.
Yeah.
Hopefully, people will get it and, fill it out. If we could, you know, if we could find, maybe from the internet or something, where people can sit down at their computer and fill this out, because I have a feeling that some people
Yeah.
are not going to, when they're gonna look at the length of our survey
So,
on paper and say.
how does, to your point, Sal,
Yeah.
how does the board feel about having a survey and then a deeper survey that residents could fill out too? Whereas somebody, you know, has the time for 15 minutes and other people have time for 7 days.
Yeah, I mean, that's my point.
And I tell you what,
If we keep it simple.
in the past, I would hesitate to make a suggestion like this, but in today's world, the analysis of this type of what's called unordered data is possible in quick fashion. So I don't think I'd necessarily, you know, I think it's probably a good suggestion to have maybe like a 2-tiered system where you get input as many people as you can, but then if you wanna give like more input,
Right.
there's like a focused way of.
Maybe on the
pushing that.
internet or something like
Yeah,
that.
well,
Yeah.
I would suggest that most of this will be electronic. very little will be.
Well, the mechanics of getting this out, I thought were gonna follow the process of mailers plus online. And that was gonna be it. The real issue is the non-property owner resident, renters and businessmen. Well, they would come up with the tax roll.
So yeah, this is a really good question. So the question is, who is the master plan for? Now, the obvious answer is, right, the residents, right? But the
Property owners.
property, right, that's the obvious. The not so obvious answer is the workers, the people that commute in, the people that use the post office, the people from Basking Ridge that use, the shopping facilities there. So,
They're not gonna see it.
well, no.
Unless it's
So we can manage, number one, the property owners, thank you. We can manage the input, egress of those inputs, right? And then we can manage those who are not identified on the tax rolls as a property owner, and this is a little more tricky, the rent rolls are a little bit more tricky, to get a hold of. But these are all public information, I want to make sure that what we're doing is on the public information side. So I don't see any reason why we can't have,
Yeah, I think
the data.
we could do the short form, we can refer to as the judge's version, which really wasn't. It was a collaborative survey put together by a lot of people. But if we update that with those two items that was on the first survey, 5 and 6 you felt you'd add. Question 5 that refers to job comes out. That's the one that we can get in the mail, get to as many and put online. And then the longer survey, whichever you decide to select, basically would be electronic. I can't see how that would be.
Both are like,
I know, right?
We're talking about.
The option to mail it back or scan a QR code.
Right, and just fill
I
it out
think we can do both.
with a code that identifies the property owner.
Mhm.
As,
I
some
do,
sort
I
of-
do think whatever the cover page of this is really important.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Right?
This is
Make
not
sure this
scary, we really want your input.
Really, this is addressing all of the issues in town
Right.
that everybody here has been concerned about. Here's your opportunity to chime in and help us
Right.
re-engineer a master
And I
plan.
think you could do a good job of it too through social media, right? Like,
Absolutely.
pushing it through Instagram,
Sure.
Facebook, notifying
Yeah.
people, be on the lookout, this is coming through, we need your input, et cetera, et cetera. I think people really pay attention to that.
I love that.
Okay, so at this point, I'm gonna ask John to come up with the questions, circulate them to the,
I'm gonna read you
Members
the
here.
short version.
no, you're gonna write them down, you're gonna send them through email, an official to the board, so that we can have a final discussion of what they're gonna be at the next meeting.
Okay.
All right, that's what I'd like to do, and then we can amplify those and approve, question by question at the next meeting. I think the board knows, our length at this point and where we are. There's some of us who are fairly well versed on the technology side that feel comfortable, that is one of them, I'm sure, engineering this in a quick fashion, in a proper fashion. That being said, we do have, one issue that reared its, I'm gonna say this in the opportunity head. I'm trying to think of the most generous thing I can say about it, which is the bill that was just signed into law. So this is where we are with this. By December 1st, and like 6 months from now, right? We need to have a pretty much full plan for how we're gonna, deal with the affordable housing.
Well, not necessarily.
Okay, go ahead.
December 1st DCA is
Oh.
to publish
The number,
the number.
okay.
Now, historically, those dates have always slid back a little bit. This bill that was just signed was supposed to be signed in December.
Right.
Issues came up, slid along, so it's 3 months late. Will the December 1st date slide into 2025? Historically, the answer to that is yes. and all those other dates moved down the calendar. But to not start talking about what we're gonna do, we're gonna be in the 500, 600 number range.
Okay,
We are not-
let's just not throw out a number here. When you say we're gonna be in the 500 or 600 unit range, that means our low and moderate income requirement for the township.
Right.
In terms of units. And a portion of those units could be different housing styles,
Correct.
right? Okay, I just wanna make sure that we're speaking clearly on what's required.
I mean, you could go all the way from what was pushed years ago, eco housing, the mother-in-law apartments, people actually, there's not a lot of them, but some of them out in Huntington County caught on in some of those towns. They're little cottages, people were putting them in their backyard. And they were somehow or other allowing the, in-laws to move in, generally elderly, and
And that was given credit
they
under
were
the,
getting credit.
okay, well, it's certainly creative.
Yeah.
I guess the bad side of this is, and this is the one thing I wanna just bring to the board's attention, and obviously the township committee at the same point, is if we get a number on December 1st, we have a decision to either accept that number or appeal that number by January 31st, basically
Correct.
60 days later.
Correct.
If we agree with that number, then, and this is where it gets a little dicey, we can agree with that number, and then we have to start planning to build that number in some fashion, or we'll get sued for that number in some fashion, or we may be protected against a lawsuit in some fashion, but we don't really know. Or, and this is the other side of that, is we can appeal it on January 31st or beforehand, and then we're at the mercy of the courts or whomever the council is,
That board.
the board that they're gonna create.
Which if you can't come and resolve to that, you then move to court.
Which means in the meantime, and this is very important aspect, between the appeal and the agreement on how many units we're allowed to do, we're gonna get sued for market housing, and instead of 600 houses, we're gonna have 3,000 houses. Okay, so this is why this is a really delicate balance of whether we accept it. I know there's been some talk about like fight. Well, sometimes fight, wind you up with a lot more units, yeah.
I was about to ask you, so I think you just clarified it. We have 500 to 600 affordable housing units. Is there a fair market? Right, well, and what is
Times
that?
4,
Times 4, so we are looking at 2,000.
and on a minimum side.
2,000 total units in the.
Yeah, be accepted.
On top,
Could be 10.
on top of the
Right.
500 or 600.
So I just wanted to be
Yeah.
clear for the public.
Yeah, it's not just 5 or 6
Not
hundred.
5, right, I just wanna make sure we got that out there.
Well, and this is where, maybe it doesn't have to be times 5. It depends on whether we can convince a court not to side with the developer who is just, well, graciously line the pockets of particular politicians. So we'll leave that.
But the comment you had is.
Probably gonna get in
the
trouble for
process.
saying that, but whatever.
The likelihood of you being sued, at this juncture, it's been 100%.
Yeah, because Warren's a place to be. Yeah.
Well, I told you, it's like the
Yeah.
roulette wheel. It's the magnitude of the increase in value of the property going from an acre and a half lot to 7, 8, 10 to the acre. You can do the math.
Yeah, but it just frustrates me that they don't, yeah, okay, the ability to build is there, but the infrastructure is not. Like, our schools, our fire, our police,
Don't care.
there's no public transportation, where are these people gonna go? How are they gonna get to work?
Yeah.
What are they doing, like, what is it doing to the town? No one cares, they just wanna build these houses. So I think that's where some of the residents, when they're like, fight, they're kinda saying, well, why can't somebody make these people understand this?
The court-
Why can't we band together with other towns, go and put up a fight and say, look, you're destroying our towns because we don't have the infrastructure to handle all of these people that you're pushing onto us.
During the third round process, it dragged out so long. I mean, the 1999 was when the cut date was, that you were supposed to have your plan in place. We got our certification in 2017. And it wasn't our fault. It was, but the process of towns banding together went through that mid-90s, early 2000s period, and there were hundreds of towns that joined together and paid in funds that weren't included. And it withered away, because the courts kept ruling, it's your responsibility to provide those services. Serious. And the law went through the Supreme Court. So it's like, you know, once the Supreme Court says, that's it, you just banging your head in the wall.
But it's our responsibility to
agree
provide these
100%.
services, but with what money? To continue to tax the residents? Is
Unfunded.
that where we're supposed to get the
Well,
money from? Because the
that's
state's not
the-
giving it to us.
That's the problem you have in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Everything is property tax.
Mhm.
And that, you know, we're not gonna solve that one.
That being said, personally, I'd like to see us have a fighting chance of putting up well, let's say, if we have to put up a particular number for housing, then we have to put it up. There's not a whole lot we can do about it.
Yeah.
And we've already been down that road on three other rounds.
Our thing
and
is,
been the wrong
as
side
I
of it.
said, we're going through the process of evaluating the vacant land sites.
Right.
Whether there's a provision in the act that allows you to do what they call realistic development potential. And that means how much acres do you actually have that's suited for this? And the basic rule that's come about, pieces that are acre or less don't have to be included. They really can't be affordable housing in a Warren environment. If you're in Denellen, Middlesex, you know, Brook, that's a different story. So I don't know that answer to that one at this point, but it may reduce our number a little bit, or a lot. In addition, it appears that they're gonna go back to the same type of process, that it'll be a judge in Somerset County that will rule on our proposal. If we're being sued, we're gonna get into the process of what is the percent set aside? Is it gonna be just rental housing under the law at 15? We averaged over 35% on this last go round. So we reduced our obligation by a ton. I mean, the original obligation was 1,496. We ended up with just under 7. That's under 8.
Okay, there's a lot to digest in one meeting. Probably went about half hour longer than I was hoping, but really good stuff. I'm not zoning on here. I'm gonna see if Iowa won. Any other further questions at this point? I think, John, you got your homework cut out for you. And I'd like to get some action items in the next, board meeting to start this process. Open up this meeting to the public for any, agenda items. Come forward, state your name.
I'm Bill Gilbert, 17 Footlock Drive. Just two quick things. Mr. Chadwick's comments about the affordable housing dates, I think they're in the legislation, so I'm not sure slipping it's gonna be quite so likely as in the past, but who knows, given that that's all new. My main comment is related to the survey. Having done tons and tons of online surveys, this should be an online survey. Paper, unless somebody doesn't have a computer, but, you know, there should not be any paper involved. If you're gonna do two versions, that's easy to do long. You were concerned in some of the comments about the length of some of the surveys, you know, with some of the questions that were, you know, taken out, the demographic type things. Even the first survey you went through could easily be done in in probably less than 10 minutes by most people. But regardless of that, 2 lengths of surveys, easy to do, as you all know. So it should definitely be an easy thing to do from a mechanical point of view. So, and I'm glad to hear the discussion about free-form answers and analyzing that. That makes perfect sense in today's world.
Just a quick feedback, my 83-year-old mom would appreciate a mail-in response, so while it's probably, there's a larger percentage of that would do it online, there still is, and so we still need to spend the money on and do.
And my 98-year-old neighbor Mike as well.
Yeah, so we all have those people in our lives, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none? Oh man, Jackie, come on.
Jack Klinger, 80 Briarwood Drive.
Welcome.
One of the things we talk about when we're thinking about the future, it's thinking about the commercial and office space and what that trend is going on. And so maybe the way to deal with Chubb and other properties that are gonna be like that is to talk about what would the town like to see happen as we know that those commercial properties are gonna dwindle as time goes on.
Right.
And so that might be one way to steer a question and get us towards where, because we've got a couple of big developments that are probably gonna be struggling, because if you look up and down,
No question
down
about
Erie
it.
Road, the
Yeah.
same thing happened, and Basking Ridge is converting one of those to senior housing now.
Yeah.
So I think thinking about how we talk about some of this commercial space and corridor concepts
That's the key, right?
is a way to kind of get towards, I think, some of that.
That's a good point.
The other thing is maybe thinking a little more about rural nature and starting to talk again about conservation easements and buffers, and thinking about, do people want a little more of that sort of tree space around as things are gonna get developed? And so, again, if we put the intent in the master plan,
I like that.
that's what we're gonna argue in court eventually,
Sure.
right? This is playing a defensive game at some
Right.
point, right? So what are the arguments we're gonna be, staring down? You wanna be able to go to the court and say, hey, the nature of the town, the plan is to keep in this direction. Let's think about some of those types of things we might sneak into the plan that says, that's what the folks want, is to kind of keep that going forward. The next one was fire protection, gonna be a huge issue.
Yes.
Lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, where residential housing is required sprinkling. Starting at that level, which is very onerous, up through, should we be thinking about what we want multi-floor structures to be constructed like? Starting to put out and say, they have to be sprinkled, they have to have, it's an intent because we know we have a problem with firefighting.
I'm so on board with this conversation, 100%. It's just not a master plan conversation. I tell you why, because it's dictated by the UCC, and then we don't have the right to dictate building construction norms.
But if there's water constraints on the properties, can you get towards some of that? I mean, if
No.
we know we don't have water flow and.
We don't. So for good or bad, the UCC, Uniform Construction Code, pretty much dictated what was allowed regardless of the political nature of the town. It was done for that purpose, to some extent. It was also done for safety and a bunch of other things. But we don't, while I might agree with some of the things you would suggest, such as steel construction on multi-story buildings, a certain fire, class 2 fire, class 2B fire, extinguishing system within the buildings, yes, all those true. It's also, all that is UCC, it's not either planning board or
Try to do a bit of a dance with like Wagner Farm to get them to be able to meet the water requirements.
I voted no on that, but yes, I appreciate you.
You know what I'm saying? They had to build cisterns and a whole bunch of other
Right.
things to try to get around that. And I think it's thinking further about self-protection.
Yeah.
That we think an intent should be, we know we're a rural town, we know we're a volunteer fire department, we're gonna be struggling with that. And it may, we don't want to decide to put taxing for it.
Completely agree.
So I'm thinking just, are there ways to get creative in some of that? And knowing water's a problem, access to getting fire trucks in and out of a lot of these communities, because again, the roads they want to put in are tiny, right? And so you're not gonna get a truck in there easily. So I think it's just thinking about some of that and egress.
Yeah, and we also, and again, I just wanna bring back the conversation, RSIS dictates the access of fire department, equipment into all residential roads. So anything, you know, after 93 or 94 like that, would have to have, like, they're not allowed to build those small roads anymore. And I'm not playing devil's advocate, I'm just saying, a lot of that is outside the purview of a particular master plan, but not of all things, so.
Yeah, I mean, it could get to the intent is that we don't want dead-end streets, we would prefer flow-through streets or things like that. Could be
That was
something
litigated and
different.
rejected, but we can continue.
Again, intent versus what we're gonna argue in court someday. I mean, the thing is John pointed out, we're gonna be arguing this for 20 years.
Absolutely.
And to the extent you start to put intent in there, so that we have something to fall back on, say the community wants. But again, in this final, the short form, long form is the absolute way to go,
Yeah.
with respect for the seniors, because there are a lot of seniors that are gonna need to go on.
I mean, let's not pick on the seniors, I know quite a few other people that would.
No,
be
but my mother-in-law lives in Brightview, right, and I'm sure she has an opinion about it.
Right.
And how do we get folks like Brightview, which are not property owners, but they're paying quite a bit to be in the property? And I think
Good point.
one other thing, obviously, as we're getting to is thinking about senior housing in the town. And because this country is growing, so what do people want in terms of whether it's gonna be, you know, grandmother houses on the property, or do we want other types of structures?
Probably the most interesting conversation of the night, right?
So, yeah,
Where's mom living, right out back in the backyard?
sometimes allow it temporarily, right? And it has to come down when they leave the property. I mean, there's all sorts of different types of rules that I've seen in different towns.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate the input. Anyone else? Okay. Gonna close this portion of the meeting and entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone.